The Fuji X100VI. It is one of the most popular cameras, and people are clamoring to get it. But it's back-ordered everywhere. Buy it on the secondary market and spend a fortune. But there is another option that looks awfully similar to the Fuji. It's way cheaper, yet has a vintage look, color, and style that's really cool. It is the Lumix GX9. In this video, we're going to take a close look at this camera and compare it to the Fuji.
Hello again. Now, since the Fuji has become such a popular camera, it's natural to see a lot of copycat cameras come out. As a matter of fact, a couple were just released as of the making of this video, but they kind of missed the mark in terms of photography.
The Lumix S9 is actually geared towards vloggers. It's a full-frame camera, but it doesn't even have a viewfinder. And in today's day and age, that's just a deal break. We all want a viewfinder. And since it's a full-frame camera, it requires full-frame lenses, which tend to be a lot bigger and heavier, and that sort of defeats the purpose of having a small camera. The Deluxe 8 has a similar look too, but there's a rear screen, and you know what? The rear screen does not even tilt. Seriously? I don't think so. So what's so nice about this discontinued GX9 is that it's a micro four thirds camera, which means it uses very small lenses. I like this Olympus 14 to 42 millimeter lens, which gives you an equivalent 28 to 84 millimeters, perfect for walking around, street photography, travel photography, and look how small it is. There's a 15 millimeter or 30 millimeter equivalent f1.7. Great prime lens, tiny again, and look how small this little pancake lens is at a 28 millimeter equivalent. It's about the thickness of my thumb and with an f2.5 aperture. This is a zoom lens that goes from the equivalent 70 to 200. Again, look how tiny it is. You have to get this one from Japan, as opposed to the Fuji, which has a fixed 35 millimeter equivalent lens. Now, yes, you can crop to 50 and 70, but realize that's a digital crop, not an optical zoom. Now, the Micro Four Thirds is a smaller sensor than the Fuji, but realize that size isn't always everything. The color science used by Panasonic Lumix has been very popular, and it's the same sensor that was in the ultra-popular G9 camera used by many photographers for years. Don't dismiss Micro Four Thirds. Some very popular YouTube influencers shot their videos and still use Panasonic cameras. So technically, there's a 20 megapixel sensor inside the GX9, replacing the 16 megapixel GX85. The GX8 also had a 20 megapixel sensor, but the GX9 gets rid of the low pass filter for greater sharpness. Now, it's a small camera, so you may think it doesn't have many features, right?
That's where you're wrong.
So not only does the rear screen tilt, but the viewfinder tilts up as well, giving you the option of getting creative angles, and you don't see this anymore on a lot of cameras. And I find it useful, especially if you're outside in bright sunny weather where you can't use the screen. It's a nice touch and a vintage touch too. Now, speaking of vintage, with the Fuji, you don't have that feature, but with the flip of a switch, you can go from an optical to a digital viewfinder. However, I find that I really don't use the optical viewfinder. Both cameras have in-body image stabilization, and that works really well with the GX9 and is very useful for both photos and video. And you get some nice bells and whistles with the GX9, like 4K photo where you can grab a frame from your video, and it also has focus stacking. There's no mic input, but there is a micro HDMI port.
So yes, Fuji has their notorious film simulation modes, which people like, but maybe you didn't know that the GX9 also has a couple of modes of their own. As a matter of fact, they've got some really cool black and white modes. I'm going to show you some example of these coming up right now, along with some other pictures taken directly from the camera.
Which camera do you think weighs more?
Wow, I can hardly tell which one is which. They are really close. Even though I'm blindfolded right now, would you mind giving this video a thumbs up and subscribe? It would really help the channel. I can't see that you're doing it, but I appreciate it. Let's talk about video now between these two cameras, even though I can't see. The Fuji can shoot in 6.2K video.
So this was shot in the 6.2K mode on the Fuji, but been scaled down to 4K for YouTube. You're probably wondering who this guy is. No, it's not the real Trump. He occasionally shows up and directs traffic in Midtown Manhattan, and I happened to be there at the time, so I thought I'd share this with you. Now, that guy might be a little nuts. This guy likes little nuts, and the GX9 is doing a really good job. Look at the crisp, even though it's not 6.2K at 4K, really looks good. The colors are great, sharpness is great, and the image stabilizer is keeping it steady. Now with this Olympus lens, I can use various focal lengths, which makes the shot more interesting as I can go from zoom and then I could go back even wider. The lenses you can use with this camera really make it a great system. There is a 9mm or 18mm equivalent ultra wide angle lens, but I also use a macro lens, which gets me shots like this. Did I do any post-processing? Great question. No, these are all JPEGs straight from camera. So since we're kind of comparing these two cameras, why don't we take them both out under the same conditions and see how they do? I'll let you be the judge comparing one against the other. Now, a larger sensor camera will give you more background blur, and you can see this is the Fuji and this is the GX9. But if I put on a longer zoom lens on the GX9, you can get a much better background blur. And I used that tiny zoom lens which I showed you earlier in the video. The Leica 15mm prime is great for low light shooting, so I took the camera out in low light conditions, and now you can take a look and see how this smaller sensor camera does with a fast lens. Well, take a look and see for yourself. By the way, these shots were taken right around sunset and a little after. It was a lot darker out than it looks in the photos. With its compact size, pop-up flash, easy-to-use controls, tilting LCD screen, image stabilization, the GX9 is a competent little camera.
So if you're looking for a compact vintage camera like the Fuji, but you don't want to spend the Fuji prices, well then the GX9 is something you may want to consider. Now of course it is older tech. The autofocus isn't as fast, the sensor is smaller, and some of the bells and whistles aren't there, but it does have quite a number of bells and whistles that the Fuji doesn't have, especially those interchangeable lenses. And you know what? I really like Panasonic's color science. The colors, there's something about them. They just look really poppy, the contrast is really good, and the images are really pleasing. And if you like the black on black, Well, the GX9 comes in that color too. It's too bad this camera has been discontinued. A lot of people would like to see it come back. But in the meantime, you can buy it secondhand for $1,000 or under. And that's half or even less than half the price of the Fuji. So overall, is this a winner? I'd say so. Thanks very much for watching. I appreciate your support, and we'll see you in the next video.